Well, you're about to meet our first guest, but I have to tell you right off the top that I'm sort of in awe of this gentleman because, you see, I feel as though he should be the one asking the questions because of his background. You'll understand here in just a moment. Our first guest is Randy Krehbiel with the Tulsa World. Randy, good to have you.
Thanks for asking me.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. How long a reporter?
Well, I started as a student in 1974. I've been at the Tulsa World since 1979. I went there as a sports writer, mainly covered college football, but did a lot of other things too. And then in the early 90s, I switched over to news, and I've been doing news ever since.
Ever get assigned to work the obit desk?
I never covered obits, but I did do a lot of pretty lopsided high school football games.
Which was enough to make you cry.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Clearly was. You gave some advice once, and I found it when I Googled some of the stories you'd written over the years, what you've learned in the trenches. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Well, one of the things that I learned, and I tell people sometimes, is that the worst trick you can play on a public official is to quote them accurately. Because there's no wiggling out of that. They can't claim they were misquoted, and they can't say that it was taken out of context. And again, if you quote them accurately, sometimes that's the worst thing you can do to them.
What's the biggest danger facing reporters today?
Well, I think. Of course, one is just the overall shrinkage in local news in terms of news operations, which means that the reporters that are still around, that are still working in the profession, are doing more things. They don't have as much time to do stories like they would like to do or that they need to be done, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the business.
I get the feeling, I know newspapers are under tremendous stress right now to make the bottom line. I understand that. Mm-hmm. Like any business, they have to. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I've grown up holding that paper in my hand wherever I've been. And when I travel, I always make an effort to get the local paper. I want to see how the folks in, I don't know, Sallisaw or Poto or Peoria or San Francisco cover the local news. I want to know what issues are important to the people there at the time I'm there. And it's pretty amazing. Some small towns, you sit back and you think, man, times gone by are still alive here. Mm-hmm. Some guy was upset because, I remember this vividly, somebody came by and painted his door red, and he had no idea why or who did it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's important to him. Mm-hmm. I'm sure his neighbors, maybe it bothers them too, but who knows? You get to San Francisco, they're concerned about the future of what's going to happen with the Rock. Mm-hmm. Are they going to turn it into a restaurant, a B&B? What's going to happen there? Will it help tourism for San Francisco? So it's a matter of schematics, that you deal with. Now, you, in looking back, know good and well what I'm talking about. Oklahoma, for all of its vast resources, all of its talent, all of its rich history, it has some marks, right. Some scar tissue, if you will. We were the recipients of all of the tribes driven here from the east who didn't really want to come. That story became the Trail of Tears. We then saw what happened with the oil companies in the industry, how many of them tried to cheat the Indians out of their royalties. In fact, they're fixing to do a movie on it up in Osage County. Right. But we also have another story, and that was the Tulsa Massacre. You got involved in that early on, didn't you?
Well, I got involved in it in the late 1990s. Actually, it was late in 1999, so it was very late in the 1990s. I was assigned to cover the commission that had been appointed by the legislature to look into what was commonly called the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. And as part of that, I was told by the executive editor of the Tulsa World to do some of my own research and to start putting together an archive for us at the Tulsa World, because we didn't really have much. We had clip files, and I guess viewers may not know what clip files are nowadays, but we used to have people at the Tulsa World whose job description included cutting up the newspaper every day and taking all the stories and putting them into little envelopes according to subject. And those were known as the clip files, or sometimes they were known as the morgue. And but ours didn't go back much before World War II. And the oldest clip we had on the race massacre was from 1949, and it had the wrong date in it. So as part of that assignment, in addition to covering the commission, I started reading all the old newspapers. We did have all the newspapers on microfilm, the World and the Tribune, which was the afternoon newspaper at that time. I guess a lot of people nowadays don't remember the Tribune, but it existed until 1992. Yeah. And so I started reading all these old newspapers, and it turned out when I started, a lot of people were of the opinion that there wasn't anything in them, or if there was, you couldn't rely on it. And what I discovered was that both newspapers had written a lot about the massacre every day for months. The Tulsa World, in fact, on June 1st, which was the second day of the massacre, besides its regular editions, it published 3 extras. And all of those are preserved on microfilm. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of information, and that kind of became the foundation for, I went from there, so to speak.
So you wrote a book.
I did.
On the massacre itself.
Mm-hmm.
Was it an eye-opener for you?
Well, it's interesting because I have all this material. I wound up reading all of the World and Tribune. I read about 2 years worth of the Tulsa World and about a year worth of the Tribune. So, but every time I would read this stuff, there would be something new in it. I'd discover something that I hadn't noticed. And so in terms of writing the book, even though I had been through all of this stuff many times, I still, as I'm assembling the book, I think, oh, that's what that means. Or I wonder why they said that. Mm-hmm. So, so the whole process of covering basically the race massacre for 20 years, which is what I've done, that was very eye-opening. The process of writing the book was eye-opening, in, I guess you would say, but in a different way, in that it caused me to think about each piece of information that I had in a different way.
What's the name of the book?
Tulsa 1921, Reporting a Race Massacre. Mm-hmm. And it is, I guess you would say that the bones of it are the reporting from newspapers about the massacre and events surrounding it. But it doesn't depend strictly on that. I've used a lot of other documentation.
Now the book's still available, is it not?
Oh yes, yeah, right.
Amazon,
Barnes and Noble. If you go into Tulsa, it's at Magic City.
Sounds like a must-have for anybody's library in this part of the country.
Well, I hope so. I mean, if you're interested in Oklahoma history, mm-hmm. and the history of northeastern Oklahoma, quite a few of the people who fled Tulsa's Greenwood area during all this wound up in the Claremore area. So
pretty amazing. There was a lady named Cleora Butler, mm-hmm. whose mother was a cook, mm-hmm. For the Phillips family, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Cleora grew up at her mother's hand and garnered all these recipes from her mom. Mm-hmm. And she there was a book written about Cleora called Cleora's Kitchen, published, I think, by Council Oak. A very telling book, because you gleaned a sense of when Count Basie came to town, he played 2 shows, one in North Tulsa, one in South Tulsa. The town was divided still, so it was a carryover. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Thank you for taking time to come in, and I'll plug your book as much as I can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend. You be safe.
Thank you.
Short break. When we come back, well, we'll go from the gridiron to the pages of history right after this.